The late-night request. The office was eerily silent, the kind of silence that made every ticking second on the wall clock sound like a drumbeat against the walls. I sat hunched over my desk, my fingers hovering over the keyboard, my eyes burning from hours of staring at the screen. The project deadline was looming, and I was the last one in the building. Again. I had grown accustomed to the solitude of late nights at work. The city outside never truly slept. But up here, in this high-rise office, the world felt strangely paused, frozen in the stillness of unfinished work. My mind raced through the numbers on the screen, but no matter how many times I recalculated, the budget wasn't lining up. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow. Measured. I glanced at the digital clock on my monitor. 10:47 p.m. No one else should be here. A chill ran up my spine. I straightened, listening carefully. Maybe it was security making their rounds, or a janitor. But these footsteps weren't the shuffling kind of someone pushing a mop bucket or carrying cleaning supplies. They were deliberate, precise. Someone was walking with purpose. I turned toward the glass doors of my office, and that's when I saw her. Sophia Kingston, the wife of Robert Kingston, my boss. She was framed by the dim hallway light, her silhouette casting a shadow on the frosted glass. She wasn't dressed for the office. A light blue blouse tucked into well-fitted jeans, a long trench coat draped over her shoulders. Casual, yet effortlessly elegant. If I had seen her on the street, I wouldn't have guessed she was the wife of one of the most powerful businessmen in the city. "Alex," she said, her voice smooth and inviting. Still hard at work. I quickly stood, caught off guard by her presence. "Mrs. Kingston, I didn't expect anyone else to be here this late." She smiled, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "Please, call me Sophia. Mrs. Kingston makes me feel ancient." I nodded hesitantly, watching as she closed the door behind her. A subtle click echoed in the silent room. "Is there something I can help you with?" I asked, keeping my tone professional. She exhaled softly, brushing a strand of dark hair from her face. "Actually, yes. I was hoping you could stay a little longer tonight." My brows furrowed. "Stay longer?" I was just about to wrap up. She stepped closer, her expression shifting into something more serious. "It's important, Alex. I need your help with something. It's not work-related, but..." She hesitated, her fingers trailing over the edge of my desk. I didn't know who else to ask. There was something in her tone, something off. Not quite nervous, but hesitant, as if she were weighing each word carefully. I had interacted with Sophia a handful of times at company events, where she was always poised and smiling at Robert's side. But now, in the quiet of my office, she seemed different. I forced a small chuckle, trying to ease the tension. "I'm not sure how I can help, but if it's something I can do, I'd be happy to." She nodded, her lips curving into a small, appreciative smile. "It's just a personal matter. Something I can't really talk about with Robert." I felt a slight unease creep in. My boss was a formidable man. Sharp, intelligent, and utterly devoted to his empire. I had never seen a crack in his seemingly perfect life. And yet, here his wife was, in my office, late at night, asking for help with something she couldn't discuss with him. "I see," I said slowly. "And what exactly do you need from me?" Sophia took a deep breath, then gestured toward the papers on my desk. "First, I need a distraction, maybe some help going through these reports. Just for a little while. I don't want to go home yet." That last sentence held weight. She didn't want to go home. I swallowed hard. The situation felt precarious, like stepping onto a bridge that swayed beneath my feet. "All right," I said, pulling out a chair for her. "I can stay a little longer." Her eyes met mine, something unreadable flickering in them. "Thank you, Alex." As she took a seat beside me, the air between us grew thick with something unspoken. This wasn't just about reports. This night was about to change everything. Sophia settled into the chair beside me, her presence subtly commanding. The air in the room felt different, as though the very atmosphere had shifted the moment she stepped inside. My fingers hesitated over the keyboard, my focus wavering, not because of the reports, but because of her. "So, what are we looking at?" she asked, leaning slightly forward. Her perfume was light, a delicate mix of jasmine and something faintly citrusy. It was a scent that lingered, that settled into the mind, making itself known without being overpowering. I cleared my throat, dragging my attention back to the reports. "These are the quarterly financial projections. There's a discrepancy in the budget that I've been trying to figure out. It's minor, but—" I stopped, glancing at her. "I doubt this is really what you came here for." She smiled, tilting her head slightly. Sharp as always, she ran a hand through her dark hair and exhaled softly. "Truth is, I needed an excuse to stay a little longer. I needed some time before I went home." I watched her carefully, weighing my words before responding. "Trouble at home." She let out a quiet chuckle, though there was no humor in it. "Let's just say things haven't been easy lately." Her fingers traced absent-mindedly over the edge of a paper. Robert, you know how he is." I did. Robert Kingston was a man who demanded perfection, both in business and in life. He was methodical, driven, and unwavering in his expectations. It was part of what made him so successful, and also what made working under him a constant test of endurance. "I always assumed the two of you had a solid marriage," I said, not entirely sure why I was pushing the conversation in that direction. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was something else, something I wasn't ready to admit to myself. Sophia gave me a knowing look. "Appearances can be deceiving, Alex." There was something about the way she said my name. Soft, familiar, almost intimate. I swallowed. "I'm sorry if things have been difficult." She shrugged, her gaze drifting toward the darkened window. "Difficult is one way to put it. Robert and we used to be different. He used to see me. But now I feel like just another piece in his empire. Another deal to be managed." She let out a slow breath. "And honestly, I don't know how much longer I can keep pretending everything is fine." There was something raw in her voice, something real. For a moment, I saw past the composed, elegant exterior, the woman who stood by Robert's side at corporate events, smiling graciously as she entertained clients. Beneath that carefully curated mask, there was someone else, someone lonely. I hesitated before speaking, unsure if I was crossing a line. "Have you told him how you feel?" She let out a soft, almost bitter laugh. "Tried. Didn't work. He listens, but he doesn't hear me. There's a difference." She turned her gaze back to me, something unreadable flickering in her eyes. "But you listen." The weight of those words settled between us. I shifted in my chair, suddenly hyper-aware of the closeness between us. "I'm not sure what I'm supposed to say." She smiled, but there was sadness in it. "You don't have to say anything. Just being here helps." The silence that followed was heavy, but not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that carried meaning, the kind that made everything else fade into the background. After a moment, she reached for one of the reports, flipping through the pages absently. "Tell me about this discrepancy you're trying to fix. Maybe I can help." I hesitated, unsure if she actually wanted to help or if this was just an excuse to prolong the moment. But then I realized I didn't mind either way. I turned the screen slightly toward her and pointed at the numbers. "See here. The projected revenue doesn't align with the actuals from last quarter. It's off by a small percentage, but it could cause problems down the line." She nodded, resting her chin in her hand as she studied the data. "So basically, someone either miscalculated or there's an error in reporting." "Exactly." I leaned back. "And since I'm the one responsible for catching these things before they become an issue, I'm stuck here trying to find the mistake." She smirked. "Ever the dedicated employee?" I chuckled. When you work for Robert Kingston, you don't have much of a choice. Her expression softened, and she looked at me in a way that made my pulse quicken. I know how demanding he can be. But you're different from the others in the company. I frowned slightly. Different how? She hesitated before answering, as if choosing her words carefully. You still care about the work. You still have that fire in you. I see it when you talk about your projects, when you solve problems that no one else even notices. You're not just here to collect a paycheck. You actually care. I swallowed, caught off guard by the sincerity in her tone. I guess I do. She leaned in slightly, her gaze holding mine. That's rare, Alex. For a moment, the conversation wasn't about work anymore. It wasn't about financial reports or long hours in the office. It was something else entirely. Something unspoken. Something dangerous. I forced myself to look back at the screen, trying to regain some sense of professionalism. Well, if you really want to help, you can take a look at these figures and tell me if I'm losing my mind. She chuckled softly, shaking her head. Fine. But just so you know, I'm terrible at math. I smirked. Great. That's exactly what I need. Someone who can't do math helping me fix a math problem. She laughed, the sound light and genuine. All right. I'll just sit here and pretend I know what I'm doing. Perfect, I said, grinning despite myself. For the next hour, we sat side by side, going through the reports. Every now and then, I would catch her watching me out of the corner of my eye, and I would pretend not to notice. The tension between us was subtle, but undeniable, and yet neither of us acknowledged it. Not out loud, but something had shifted, something neither of us could ignore. The line between right and wrong. The numbers on the screen blurred as exhaustion crept over me, but I barely noticed. The real problem wasn't the spreadsheet in front of me. It was the woman sitting beside me, her presence as distracting as a flickering neon sign in the dead of night. Sophia. She leaned back in the chair, stretching slightly, her blouse shifting just enough to reveal the delicate line of her collarbone. I forced my eyes back to the screen, willing myself to focus, but it was no use. The office was quiet, the world outside reduced to distant city lights, and the occasional sound of traffic far below. And here we were, alone, suspended in this strange moment between professional boundaries and something neither of us dared name. Okay, I give up, Sophia sighed dramatically, pushing the papers away. I officially confirm that I am useless at finance. I chuckled, rubbing the back of my neck. Well, in your defense, I never expected you to actually solve this. She smirked, her eyes gleaming under the dim office light. Then why did you let me try? I met her gaze, feeling the weight of her question settle over me. Maybe I just wanted the company. A brief silence. She studied me for a moment, as if trying to decipher whether I meant what I said. Then she leaned forward slightly, resting her elbows on the desk. Alex, she said, her voice softer now. Do you ever feel like you're trapped? Like you're living a life that looks great from the outside, but inside, you're just suffocating. I hesitated, unsure of where she was going with this. I guess everyone feels that way sometimes. She let out a small, humorless laugh. Maybe, but for some of us, it's constant. Her words carried something heavy, something deeper than just late-night office talk. I should have shut it down, reminded her that she was my boss's wife, that this conversation had no place here. But instead, I found myself asking, why do you feel trapped? She exhaled slowly, tapping her fingers lightly against the desk. Because my life isn't mine anymore, she admitted. For years, I thought I had everything I wanted. Marrying Robert, supporting his career, being part of this world. But somewhere along the way, I stopped being me and just became Robert Kingston's wife. Her words were laced with something raw, something painful, and I found myself wanting to understand. I think people underestimate what that must be like, I said carefully. From the outside, it looks like a dream life. Wealth, status, everything people think they want. But I imagine it comes with its own kind of loneliness. Her eyes met mine, and for a second, it felt like I had struck something deep, something real. "Exactly," she whispered. "I love him, or at least, I used to. But these days, I feel more like an accessory to his success than a partner. And the worst part, I don't think he even notices." A part of me wanted to reassure her, to tell her that things could change, that maybe Robert still cared but just didn't know how to show it. But the other part, the part that had been drawn to her since the moment she walked into my office tonight, didn't want to tell her that at all. Because the truth was, I could see her, and I didn't think she had felt truly seen in a long time. She looked down, her fingers tracing absent patterns on the desk. "You probably think I'm pathetic, sitting here at almost midnight, unloading my problems on you." I shook my head. "Not at all. You're human, Sophia. Everyone needs someone to talk to." She exhaled, as if relieved by my words. "Thank you," she said, her voice quieter now. "For listening, for not judging." There was something about the way she said it, something that sent a subtle thrill through me. I knew I should pull back, create distance, remind both of us of the lines we couldn't cross. But I didn't. Instead, I said, "Anytime." Her lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to say something more. But before she could, a loud thud echoed from down the hallway. We both froze. Her eyes widened. What was that? I quickly stood up, my pulse spiking. Security, maybe. Or... Before I could finish, the sound of footsteps followed. Slow, unhurried, purposeful. Someone else was here. I glanced at Sophia, and for the first time tonight, there was something other than sadness in her expression. There was fear. I motioned for her to stay quiet as I stepped toward the door, listening intently. The footsteps stopped just outside. I could hear the faint shuffle of movement, the almost imperceptible sound of someone breathing. Then, a shadow passed across the frosted glass of my office door. I felt my stomach tighten. Who the hell was out there? I turned back to Sophia, who had instinctively risen from her seat. She shook her head, her expression tense. "We should go," she whispered. I nodded. Quietly, I reached for the door handle, easing it open just enough to peer into the hallway. It was empty, but I could still feel the presence of someone nearby. I turned back to her. "Let's take the back stairs. It leads to the parking lot." She nodded, following close behind me as we moved quickly and silently toward the emergency stairwell at the far end of the floor. Every step felt heavier, the tension thick between us. When we finally reached the stairwell door, I pushed it open and let her go through first. The moment the door clicked shut behind us, she exhaled, running a hand through her hair. That was weird. Yeah, I agreed, listening to see if anyone had followed. The building was old, and every noise seemed to echo in the stairwell. Could have been security doing their rounds, but something felt off. She glanced at me, concern flickering in her gaze. "You don't think Robert?" I shook my head. "No. If it were him, he would have walked in." She nodded slowly, but I could tell the thought still lingered in her mind. We descended the stairs in silence. When we reached the parking garage, I turned to her. "Where's your car?" She hesitated, then sighed. "I took a cab earlier." I didn't plan on staying this late. I frowned, glancing around the nearly empty garage. "I'll drive you home." She looked up at me, something uncertain in her expression. "You don't have to do that, Alex." "I know," I said, "but I want to." She studied me for a moment, as if deciding whether to accept. Then she nodded. "All right." We walked toward my car, and as we did, I couldn't shake the feeling that tonight had changed something between us. And whatever it was, there was no going back. The drive into darkness. The parking garage was nearly empty, save for the distant hum of a lone fluorescent light flickering overhead. The silence stretched between us as I unlocked my car, the beep echoing in the concrete cavern. Sophia hesitated before sliding into the passenger seat. The way she smoothed her hands over her jeans, the slight exhale she gave before buckling her seatbelt, it all told me she wasn't sure about this. Neither was I. As I started the engine, the dashboard lights cast a soft blue glow over us. For a brief moment, I saw her in a way I hadn't before, not as my boss's wife, not as the untouchable woman standing beside Robert Kingston at corporate events, but as someone who looked lost. "You sure you want me to take you home?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stared out the windshield, watching the reflections of the city lights dance against the polished hood. Then, almost too softly, she said, "I don't know." I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles tightening around the leather. "I don't know." It wasn't the answer I expected, but somehow it felt like the most honest thing she had said all night. I didn't press her for more. Instead, I shifted the car into drive and pulled out of the garage. The streets were quieter now, the city winding down, but I barely noticed. My thoughts were tangled, knotted with questions I wasn't sure I wanted answers to. What was I doing? What was she doing? Neither of us had crossed a line. Not yet, but I could feel the edge of it beneath my feet, and the more time I spent around her, the more I wondered if I wanted to step over it. The road between us. Sophia stayed silent for the first 10 minutes of the drive. The only sounds were the rhythmic clicking of the turn signal and the occasional buzz of my phone vibrating in the cup holder. I ignored it. Then, out of nowhere, she said, "Robert hasn't come home in 3 days." I flicked my gaze toward her, my grip on the wheel tightening. 3 days? She nodded, still staring straight ahead. Meetings, business trips, deals that can't wait. A humorless chuckle left her lips. There's always something. I didn't know what to say. What could I say? I had worked under Robert for years. I knew he was relentless when it came to business, but 3 days. He didn't even call. I asked. She shook her head. "Oh," he texted. "Sent a quick 'hope you're okay. Talk soon' message." She let out a slow breath. It's always like this. I tell myself I should be used to it, but you never really get used to being ignored. Her voice was calm, but I could hear the strain beneath it. "You deserve better than that," I said before I could stop myself. She turned to me, her expression unreadable. "Do I?" The question caught me off guard. "Of course you do." She tilted her head slightly, watching me in the dim light. "Then why does it feel like this is just how things are supposed to be?" I didn't have an answer for her. The truth was, I had no right to be sitting here, listening to her secrets, but she had chosen to tell me anyway. And I had chosen to listen. A detour into uncertainty. As we neared her neighborhood, I felt the tension in my chest tighten. Dropping her off meant ending whatever this night was. It meant going back to normal, pretending nothing had changed. But something had changed, and I wasn't sure I wanted it to end. Sophia must have felt it too, because just before we reached her street, she murmured, "Can we just drive for a little longer?" I glanced at her, searching her face for some hint of what she was thinking, but all I saw was quiet desperation, a need for escape, for something real. I didn't hesitate. I turned the wheel and took a right, away from her house, away from responsibility, away from the safe route. She didn't ask where we were going, and I didn't tell her. For a while, we just drove. The city lights blurred into streaks of gold and red, the road stretching out before us like an open-ended question. Finally, she broke the silence. "Did you always want to do this?" she asked. "Do what?" I glanced at her. "Work for Robert. Be part of his world." I considered my answer. I wanted to build something, to be part of something important. Robert gave me that chance. "But now," she pressed, "is it still what you want?" I exhaled, gripping the wheel. "I don't know." She smiled faintly. "Seems like we have that in common." Her words hung between us, another unspoken thread tying us together. The further we drove, the heavier the air between us became. It wasn't just about the words anymore. It was about the silence that followed, the way her gaze lingered on me just a little too long, the way my pulse quickened every time she shifted in her seat. There was no denying it. We were approaching a line, and neither of us knew if we were strong enough to stop. A moment that changed everything. Eventually, we pulled into an empty overlook just outside the city, a quiet spot where the skyline stretched out in the distance, glowing against the night sky. I killed the engine, and for a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she whispered, "I don't want to go home yet." I turned to her, my pulse hammering. "Sophia." She met my gaze, something unreadable flickering in her dark eyes. "I know this is dangerous," she admitted. "I know what it looks like. But right now, I don't care." I swallowed hard. "What do you want?" She hesitated, just for a second. But then, with quiet certainty, she said, "To feel something real." The weight of her words hit me like a punch to the chest. I could hear my own heartbeat, feel the electricity in the space between us. Every rational thought screamed at me to stop, to turn the car around and take her home. But rationality had no place here. Not in this moment. Not when she was looking at me like that. I didn't move. Neither did she. But something had shifted. And we both knew it. This night wasn't over. It was just beginning. The point of no return. The city lights stretched out in the distance, a sprawling ocean of gold and silver, flickering like stars fallen to earth. The night was quiet, too quiet. No honking cars, no background hum of the city, just the sound of our breathing, heavy and uncertain. Sophia hadn't moved since she whispered those words, "To feel something real." And I hadn't answered. Because what was there to say? My mind screamed at me to be rational, to shut this down before it became something neither of us could take back. But my heart, my damn traitorous heart, was hammering against my ribs, demanding me to listen to something deeper, something raw and unspoken. She turned in her seat, her dark eyes searching mine. "Say something, Alex." I exhaled slowly, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. "I don't think there's anything I can say that won't make this harder." A small, humorless smile touched her lips. "It's already hard." She wasn't wrong. This wasn't just some late-night conversation anymore. It was a moment suspended in time, hovering on the edge of something dangerous, something irreversible. And yet, neither of us moved. Neither of us pulled away. Because we both wanted to fall. The dangerous truth between us. She turned back to the windshield, her gaze distant, lost somewhere in the endless cityscape. "You ever look at your life and wonder how you got here?" she asked softly. I hesitated before answering. "Every damn day." She let out a quiet breath, almost a laugh, but it held no humor. I used to think I had everything figured out. I knew exactly what I wanted, who I wanted, and for a while, it was perfect. I remained silent, letting her speak. But then, life happens, and one day, you wake up and you realize you're not the person you used to be. The things that once made you happy don't anymore. And the worst part, she turned to face me again, her expression unreadable. "No one notices, not even the person who's supposed to know you better than anyone." I swallowed, my throat dry. "Robert." She nodded. "I don't think he sees me anymore, Alex. I think I could disappear tomorrow, and it would take him a week to realize I was gone." There was no bitterness in her voice, no anger, just exhaustion. And something about that hit me harder than I expected, because I knew that feeling. I had spent years working under Robert, giving everything I had to his company, his vision. And yet, sometimes, I wondered if he even knew who I was beyond my job title. I understood what it was like to feel invisible, and I understood what it was like to crave something, anything, that reminded you you were still alive. A temptation that couldn't be ignored. She shifted slightly in her seat, her fingers brushing against the leather. "Tell me I'm crazy," she said suddenly. I blinked. What? She turned to me fully now, her body angled toward mine. Tell me I'm just emotional. That this is nothing. That I should go home and pretend I don't feel this way. Her voice was quiet, but there was something desperate beneath it, like she was begging me to stop this, and at the same time, hoping I wouldn't. I opened my mouth, but no words came, because I couldn't lie to her. Not now. I leaned back, staring up at the ceiling, trying to catch my breath. I can't tell you that. A sharp exhale. Why not? Because it wouldn't be true. Silence. And then, just barely above a whisper, she asked, "Do you feel it too?" I turned to her, and for the first time, I didn't try to hide it. Yes. Her breath caught, her fingers curling slightly against her knee. Alex. I shook my head, cutting her off. This is insane. I know. We shouldn't do this. I know. This is going to end badly. She exhaled shakily. I know. And yet, neither of us moved. Because we weren't talking about reason anymore. We were talking about something deeper. Something inevitable. The first mistake that wasn't a mistake. The moment happened so fast, I barely registered it. 1 second, we were sitting there, trapped in silence. The next, she reached out, her fingers barely grazing my hand. It was the lightest touch, but it sent a shiver down my spine. I should have pulled away. I should have said something to break the moment. Instead, I turned my palm upward, letting her fingers slide against mine. Her hand was warm, soft, hesitant. I squeezed. Just slightly. Just enough to let her know she wasn't alone. She inhaled sharply, her gaze flicking to mine, and in that second, I saw everything in her eyes. The longing, the uncertainty, the quiet ache of a woman who had spent years pretending to be fine when she wasn't. And suddenly, it didn't matter what was right or wrong. Because in that moment, the only thing that felt real was her. She shifted forward, just barely, her face inches from mine. "Tell me to stop," she whispered. I couldn't, because I didn't want her to. Instead, I whispered, "I can't." And that was all it took. She closed the distance between us. Her lips brushed mine, featherlight, hesitant, like she was giving me a chance to pull away. But I didn't. I leaned in, deepening the kiss, letting go of everything except this. The taste of her, the warmth of her skin, the way her fingers curled into my shirt like she had been waiting for this, for longer than either of us wanted to admit. The world outside disappeared. There was no city, no job, no Robert. Just this. Just us. The cost of crossing the line. The kiss ended, but neither of us moved. Our breaths mingled in the space between us, our foreheads almost touching. Her hand still gripped my shirt, like she wasn't ready to let go. I wasn't sure I was either. "Alex," she started, her voice shaking slightly. I pressed a finger against her lips, shaking my head. "Don't say it." She swallowed, nodding. Because we both knew what came next. Regret. Guilt. Consequences. But in that moment, none of that mattered. Because for the first time in a long time, we felt alive. And that was worth everything. The cost of wanting more. The space between us was charged, filled with the weight of something we could no longer ignore. Her lips were inches from mine, her breath uneven. And yet neither of us moved. It wasn't hesitation that kept us still. It was the realization, the quiet, inescapable truth that there was no turning back. Sophia's fingers lingered on my shirt, her grip loose but present, like she was waiting for me to stop her or pull her closer. I did neither. Because I didn't trust myself to make the right choice. Because deep down, I knew that if I kissed her again, if I let myself feel this any longer, I wouldn't be able to let her go. And that terrified me more than anything. A fire we couldn't put out. Sophia closed her eyes for a brief moment, as if grounding herself, before slowly pulling away. She leaned back in the passenger seat, her head tilting against the window. "I shouldn't have done that," she whispered. Her words hung between us, but they felt empty, hollow. She didn't regret the kiss. She regretted what it meant. I ran a hand over my face, forcing my breathing to slow. "We both know that's not true." She let out a quiet laugh, though there was no humor in it. "I don't know what's true anymore." I turned toward her, my hands gripping the steering wheel like a lifeline. "Then tell me what you want." She hesitated, and then, almost too softly, she said, "I want to stop feeling like I'm sleepwalking through my own life." She turned to me, her eyes searching mine. "And when I'm with you, I don't feel asleep." I swallowed hard, my chest tightening, because I understood exactly what she meant. I wasn't just drawn to her because she was beautiful or forbidden. It wasn't just about the excitement of secrecy. It was because, around her, I felt awake. Like I had been walking through life on autopilot for so long that I forgot what it felt like to want something more, to want someone more. And that scared me. Because once you wake up, once you realize that the life you've been living isn't enough, there's no going back to sleep. The weight of reality. A sudden buzz shattered the silence. I glanced down at my phone in the cup holder, the screen glowing with an incoming call. Robert Kingston. I stiffened. Sophia saw it too. I felt her body tense beside me, saw the way her fingers curled against her jeans. The moment was gone, ripped away. I exhaled sharply and grabbed the phone, hesitating for just a second before answering. "Alex." Robert's voice came through, smooth and confident, as always. "I hope I'm not calling too late." I forced my voice to remain steady. "Not at all." Sophia looked away, staring out the window as if distancing herself from the reality that had just intruded on us. "I need you to come into the office early tomorrow," Robert continued. "We have a situation with one of the accounts. I need your eyes on it before the morning briefing." I ran a hand through my hair, trying to keep my mind from where I was, who I was with. "Of course, I'll be there." "Good man," Robert said. There was a slight pause. Then, almost as an afterthought, he added, "Sophia's home, right?" I felt the air shift in the car, the tension coiling tighter between us. I could lie. I could tell him yes, that she was home, safe in bed, where she was supposed to be. Or I could tell him the truth, that she was sitting next to me, in the dim glow of the city lights, her lips still tasting of regret and something unspoken. That his wife had kissed me, that I had let her, that I wanted to do it again. But the words never left my mouth. Instead, I played my part. "Yeah," I said, my voice level. "She's home." Beside me, Sophia closed her eyes, exhaling softly, as if she had been holding her breath. "Good," Robert said. "See you in the morning, Alex." The line went dead. I placed the phone back down and stared at it for a long moment, as if expecting it to ring again. It didn't. When I finally turned to Sophia, she was already looking at me. Neither of us spoke, because there was nothing left to say. A goodbye that wasn't a goodbye. I pulled the car back onto the road, heading toward her house. The silence between us was heavier now, no longer charged with tension, but with guilt. Because the moment had passed, and we had let it. When I pulled up to her house, the lights were still off. No sign of Robert. No sign that anyone had been waiting for her. She unbuckled her seatbelt but didn't move to open the door. "Thank you for the drive," she murmured, still staring ahead. I nodded, gripping the wheel. "Anytime." She hesitated, then turned to me, her eyes softer now. "Are you going to be okay?" I let out a short, breathless laugh. "I should be asking you that." She smiled, but it was small, tired. "I'll be fine. I always am." And that, more than anything, made my chest ache. Because she shouldn't have to be. She reached for the door handle, but before she left, she paused. "Alex." "Yeah?" She turned back to me, her gaze filled with something I couldn't quite name. "If I call you, she said softly. Will you answer? A million unspoken things hung between us in that question. I should have told her no. I should have told her this was over. But instead, I told her the truth. Yes. She nodded, as if she already knew I would. Then, without another word, she stepped out of the car and disappeared into the night. The line had been crossed. I sat there for a long time after she left, staring at her front door, waiting for something, anything, to make sense. But nothing did, because the truth was, we had already crossed the line. Not with the kiss, not even with the way she looked at me, but with the fact that we had let it happen. And we both knew it wouldn't be the last time. I let out a slow breath, gripping the wheel so tightly my hands ached. I should drive home. I should forget tonight ever happened. But even as I told myself that, I knew the truth. I didn't want to. Because Sophia Kingston wasn't just my boss's wife anymore. She was something else entirely. Something I couldn't walk away from. And something that, deep down, I didn't want to. The lies we tell ourselves. The drive back to my apartment felt like a dream I wasn't sure I wanted to wake up from. The city passed by in a blur of neon lights and empty streets, but my mind was stuck somewhere else. Stuck on her. On the way Sophia's voice had cracked when she said she didn't want to go home. On the way she looked at me, searching for something she couldn't find anywhere else. On the way her lips had felt against mine. I gritted my teeth, gripping the wheel tighter as if that would steady the chaos in my head. This was wrong. It had been wrong from the moment she stepped into my office, from the moment I let myself listen when she said she felt invisible, from the moment I didn't push her away when she leaned in. But if it was so wrong, why couldn't I stop thinking about it? By the time I pulled into my apartment parking lot, it was past midnight. My phone was still in the cup holder, the screen dark. No messages, no calls. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt like I was waiting for something. Something that wouldn't come. Or at least, not yet. The morning after, sleep was useless. I had spent the entire night replaying everything, the weight of what happened pressing against my chest. When I finally gave up on trying to rest, I dragged myself into the shower, hoping the scalding water would wash away the thoughts swirling in my head. It didn't. By the time I got to the office, I felt like a man walking through a fog, aware of his surroundings, but not really present in them. The usual morning chaos was in full swing. Phones rang, employees moved with purpose, conversations hummed around me like white noise. Everything looked normal, but nothing felt that way. I stepped into my office, closing the door behind me before sinking into my chair. The moment I let out a slow breath, there was a knock. I stiffened, and then the door opened. Sophia. She stepped inside carefully, closing the door behind her with a quiet click. She wasn't supposed to be here. Not now. Not after last night. But I couldn't bring myself to say it. Hi, she said softly, standing just inside my office as if she wasn't sure whether to come closer. I nodded, my mouth suddenly dry. Hey. She hesitated, her fingers brushing against the strap of her purse. I wasn't sure if I should come. Then why did you? Her lips pressed together, and I could see the conflict in her eyes. She wasn't here as Robert's wife. She wasn't here as the polished woman everyone admired from a distance. She was here because she needed to be. And I knew exactly how that felt. I needed to see you, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Those words sent a sharp pulse through me, something I didn't want to name. Because I needed to see her too. I ran a hand through my hair, exhaling. Sophia, last night. I know, she cut in. We shouldn't have. She said the words, but neither of us believed them. She took a step closer, closing the distance between us just enough to make my pulse spike. I don't regret it, she admitted, but I don't know what to do now. I swallowed hard. Neither do I. She let out a soft breath, looking down at the floor as if it held the answers. We can't. I started, but she looked up at me sharply, her eyes searching mine. We already did. A pause, a truth neither of us wanted to say aloud. Then, another knock at the door. Before I could react, Robert's voice cut through the moment. "Alex, you in there?" Sophia froze. Our eyes locked. Her breathing was unsteady. So was mine. There was no time to think, no time to panic. Without a word, she turned and disappeared into the small hallway leading to the private conference room connected to my office. A split second later, the door opened and Robert walked in. I forced my expression into something neutral. "Morning, sir." He nodded, striding in with the confidence of a man who had never once questioned his place in the world. "I trust you're ready for the briefing." "Yes," I lied. Because how could I be ready? Sophia was in the next room. My boss was standing right in front of me. And I had never felt more like I was standing on a tightrope, with nothing to catch me if I fell. A fire we couldn't put out. Robert went on about the upcoming deals, the clients we needed to impress, the numbers that mattered. I tried to focus. I really did. But all I could think about was her. She was right there, just on the other side of the wall. And every second that passed felt like a countdown to something inevitable. When Robert finally stood up, he checked his watch. "I need to take a call. We'll pick this up later." I nodded, barely breathing as he strode toward the door. And then, just as he reached it, he paused. I stiffened. For a split second, I thought, he knows. But then he turned back, his brows furrowed slightly. "Everything okay, Alex?" I forced a small, tight smile. "Of course. Why?" He studied me, as if trying to figure out something he couldn't quite place. Then he shook his head. "You just seem distracted. If only you knew." "I'm fine," I said. He didn't look convinced, but he let it go. And then, finally, he was gone. The door clicked shut behind him. A second passed, then another. And then Sophia stepped out. Her face was pale, her hands slightly shaky. "That was too close," she whispered. I stood, my heart still pounding. "We have to stop this." She shook her head. "We can't." I stared at her, and for the first time, I saw it clearly. This wasn't something we could control. It wasn't something we could ignore. It had already started, and no matter how much we lied to ourselves, there was no stopping it now. The breaking point. The door had barely closed behind Robert before everything changed. Sophia stood there, her chest rising and falling with unsteady breaths, her fingers curled into the fabric of her blouse as if trying to hold herself together. The silence between us wasn't just heavy. It was suffocating. Because we both knew. We weren't stopping. We weren't walking away. We were too far gone. I took a slow step toward her, and she didn't move. Didn't back away. "I mean it, Sophia," I said, though my voice lacked conviction. "We have to stop this." She let out a short, breathless laugh, shaking her head. "You keep saying that." "Because it's true." "Then why don't we?" I had no answer. Because I didn't want to stop. Because some sick, twisted part of me was thriving on this. The secrecy. The danger. The way she looked at me like I was the only person in the world who truly saw her. Her eyes locked onto mine, dark and unreadable. "Tell me you don't want this, Alex," she whispered. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Because we both knew the truth. I wanted this. I wanted her. More than I should. More than I could admit. And in that moment, there was no fight left in me. The decision we couldn't take back. She took the first step. Then another. And then she was right in front of me. Close enough that I could feel the warmth of her breath, smell the faint trace of her perfume. Something light, something intoxicating. Her fingers hesitated before sliding up my arm. The touch so light, it sent a shiver through me. "This is wrong," I murmured. Her lips parted slightly. "Then stop me." I couldn't. I wouldn't. Because stopping her meant losing this moment. And I wasn't ready for that. So instead of stopping her, I did the one thing I shouldn't have. I pulled her closer. And then I kissed her. Not like before. Not hesitant, not cautious. This was reckless. This was desperate. This was a mistake we both wanted to make. She let out a soft gasp, her fingers tightening in my shirt, her body pressing against mine as the kiss deepened. There was no hesitation anymore. No second guessing. There was only us. Damn the consequences. Damn the guilt. Damn everything except this. I backed her against the desk, my hands gripping the edges as if that would ground me, as if that would stop me from falling further. But I was already gone. She pulled away first, breathless, her eyes wild. "Alex." I swallowed hard, my forehead resting against hers. I know. But knowing didn't change anything. Because neither of us were stopping. Not now. Not ever. The sound that changed everything. Then, a sound. A sharp, unmistakable sound that froze us both. The office door opening. We barely had time to react before a voice cut through the air. "Sophia." "Robert." Every ounce of blood drained from my body. Sophia went rigid. Our eyes met, and for the first time, I saw real fear in hers. Because this wasn't a close call. This wasn't a moment we could brush off. This was it. This was the moment where everything fell apart. I stepped back instantly, straightening my tie, my breath coming too fast as I tried to compose myself. Sophia turned, her face perfectly neutral by the time she faced her husband. But Robert wasn't stupid. He stood there in the doorway, his sharp blue eyes flicking between us, his expression unreadable. "Sophia," he repeated, slower this time. "What are you doing here?" Her voice didn't waver. "I came to talk to Alex about a charity event." Nothing important. The lie was smooth, practiced. But Robert didn't buy it. I could see it in the way his jaw tensed, the way his fingers curled against the doorframe. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but I didn't get the chance. Because then he smiled. But it wasn't a real smile. It was something sharper, colder, something that sent a wave of dread down my spine. "Well," Robert said, stepping further inside, "then I suppose I should be grateful my wife is keeping my employees busy." Sophia forced a polite smile. "I was just leaving." She moved toward the door, and for a split second, I thought we were going to get away with it. That we had managed to dodge the worst. But then, just as she reached him, Robert grabbed her wrist. I tensed. Sophia didn't react, didn't pull away. But I saw it. The way her body stiffened. The way her smile faltered, just for a fraction of a second. The way Robert leaned in, murmuring something just low enough that I couldn't hear it. Then he let her go. And she walked out, leaving me alone with him. The calm before the storm. The moment the door closed behind her, the air in the room shifted. The tension was suffocating. Robert turned to me, his expression unreadable, his hands slipping into his pockets like he wasn't in any kind of rush. I forced myself to hold his gaze, to act normal, to pretend like my heart wasn't hammering against my ribs. "Is there something I can help you with, sir?" I asked, keeping my voice even. His smile didn't waver, just checking in. Checking in. Bullshit. His gaze flickered to the desk for the briefest moment, to where Sophia had been standing just seconds ago. Then, back to me. "You're a valuable employee, Alex," Robert continued. "Smart. Ambitious. Loyal." He said the word loyal slower, like it meant something else. Like he knew. Like he was testing me. I didn't blink. "I appreciate that, sir." Silence. Then, "Let's grab dinner soon," he said smoothly. "Just you and me." I swallowed hard. Dinner. With Robert Kingston. Alone. Something about the way he said it, the way he looked at me, it felt less like an invitation, and more like a warning. I nodded slowly. "Of course." Robert smiled again. Then he turned and walked out, leaving me standing there, my pulse roaring in my ears. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Because I knew. He knew. Maybe not everything. Maybe not yet. But this wasn't over. This was just beginning. And the next move would decide everything.